I declare this congregation open. Mr. Vice-Chancellor, Mr. Pro-Chancellor, learned doctors, ladies and gentlemen, on behalf of the University, I welcome you all here on this very fine day to our ceremonies of giving degrees. You will, I think, find on your places a descriptive paper telling you what it is all about. First of all, I must particularly welcome, of course, the graduates, whose day it is, and who will be receiving their degrees. And among them particularly the honorary graduates, Mrs. Elliott and Professor Shurbanov. We are delighted to have them here to receive their degrees, and also their friends, the directors of Messrs. Faber, to whom the university is much indebted, and also the friends of Professor Shurbanov. I would also like to welcome the ambassador to Bulgaria and his wife, and many prominent people from Kent and Canterbury. We are particularly anxious to keep on good terms with the local authorities, by whose grace we survive, and with the church and other authorities, to whom we are also highly indebted. I therefore, on behalf of the University, welcome the Lord Mayor of the City of Canterbury and the Lady Mayoress, and the High Sheriff of the County of Kent, and Mrs. Ward, and two superintendents of the Kent Constabulary. We are particularly anxious to keep in well with the police, and I'm very glad to see them here. They are the past and present superintendents of the Canterbury district. We also have the chairman of the Kent County Council, Sir Don Gudgeon and Lady Gudgeon. We have also the chairman of the Kent Society, Sir David Crouch, who is a very old friend of the university and whose society I recommend to you. Now, ladies and gentlemen, we have to thank the Dean and Chapter of the Cathedral for allowing us to use this magnificent building, which makes our degree ceremonies so much more impressive and indeed agreeable than they otherwise would be. And we are very grateful to them indeed. Now, I hold the purely honorary, some people might say bogus, office of Chancellor. Behind me are ranged the really working part of the upper echelons of the university. They are the people who run it, the Vice-Chancellor, the deans of faculty, and so forth. And it is to them we owe its success. And after 25 years, we can say that their success is very considerable. And I think that, like previous generations of graduates, those who get their degrees today will look back upon their time at the university and upon this particular day, perhaps, with pleasure, and we hope that they and their relations have a very happy and successful day, in that it will show that they have been successful in their education. We now move on to the bestowal of the honorary degrees.
Most Honourable Chancellor, Valerie Elliott is a scholar of distinction who has also been a generous patron to the university. It is entirely fitting that in this Silver Jubilee year we should be honoring someone so closely associated with the founding of the first of the university's colleges 25 years ago. This is also the 25th anniversary of the death of her husband, T.S. Eliot, after whom that college was named. Valerie Eliot has assisted in establishing the T.S. Eliot Memorial Lectures in association with Faber and Faber, the publishing firm in which she and her husband worked for many years. She was instrumental in securing W.H. Auden as the university's first lecturer when the series began in 1968. She has also endowed the annual Eliot Poetry Prize for students at the university. Valerie Eliot's life is a record of singular devotion to the man many regard as this century's greatest poet in the English language. That devotion manifested itself at an early age. On one occasion, during her school days, her teacher played to the class a record of John Gielgud reading Eliot's The Journey of the Magi. The 14-year-old Valerie Fletcher listened in a kind of rapture before going away to read everything she could find by the poet. By her own account, it was then and there that she made up her mind to work with Eliot. Barely a decade later, on a day in August 1949, Valerie Fletcher, her hand bandaged as a result of a cut from a tin can a day or two before, was pacing around Russell Square trying to steady her nerves. She had applied for a secretarial post at Faber and Faber and was now due to be interviewed by the man who had written The Journey of the Magi. At the interview, Eliot smoked hard and was clearly just as nervous as the applicant. They talked about poetry. He expressed some concern over her injured hand. At length he said that, of course, he could give her no decision then and there, since other applicants had yet to be interviewed, but, with some hesitation, he expressed his hope that the injured hand would be fully recovered in 10 days' time. Valerie Fletcher worked for him at Faber and Faber for nearly 8 years. Early in 1957, she and Eliot were married. Once, gazing at an effigy of Francis Drake in Tavistock town centre, my small son asked, "When a person dies, does he become a statue?" Sometimes, when a famous person dies, he or she becomes a kind of public property and is helplessly exposed to the accumulating layers of graffiti from well or ill-meaning critics and biographers. T.S. Eliot has not been posthumously helpless in this respect. Valerie Eliot is in the peculiar position of having to reconcile her public status as a custodian of a national monument with her own private life, which is still resonant with the personality of the very private man whom she knew better than anyone else now living, the man also who enjoined her to preserve that privacy. She has, since Eliot's death, devoted her time, her awesome energy, and her scholarly skills to establishing the record of her husband's life and work as accurately as possible and as fully as is consistent with his desire for privacy. In 1971, she completed her invaluable edition of the facsimile and transcript of the original drafts of The Wasteland, enabling us for the first time to understand the complicated stages in the composition of this literary landmark of the 20th century. It also enabled us to recognize the extent to which this formidable masterpiece grew from deeply personal roots. In this respect, Valerie Elliott has succeeded in bringing into very close relationship the public poet and the private man. It becomes clearer and clearer that Elliott had many more sides to his personality than are suggested in our standard image of an austere, remote figure. The man who wrote Murder in the Cathedral, first performed in 1935, barely 150 yards from this lectern, was also a great practical joker with a childlike sense of fun. The man who wrote the four quartets was, of course, the same who wrote Old Possum's Book of Practical Cats. Incidentally, Valerie Elliott worked closely with Andrew Lloyd Webber on the musical Cats, and offered from Elliot's papers the poem Grisabella the Glamour Cat, which Elliott had decided not to publish with the other cat poems, thinking that it might frighten children too much. The emergence of the true multifaceted Elliott will be largely due to the editing and publication of his letters currently being undertaken by Valerie Elliott. It enables her, in her annotations, silently to correct many of those misconceptions about the poet which have from time to time appeared in print and assumed a kind of specious authority. The first volume of the letters was published in 1988, the centenary of Elliot's birth. It is a highly impressive work of research and scholarship, scrupulous, detailed, and lucid, and it earned its editor the Rose Mary Crawshay Prize from the British Academy. Valerie Elliott's work on these high-profile projects is carried on side by side with her directorship of Faber and Faber and her continual assistance to postgraduate students working on Eliot or on the other great modernists associated with Eliot. The scale of her correspondence with research students is such that she now devotes to it 3 days of every week. Future generations of historians, biographers, and critics of 20th century literature will be profoundly grateful for Valerie Elliott's unstinting dedication to a life's work, the present scale of which, surely, could never have been imagined, even by that inspired schoolgirl listening to the Journey of the Magi. Most Honourable Chancellor, to you and to the whole University, I present Valerie Elliott to be admitted to the degree of Doctor of Letters, Honoris Causa.
By virtue of the authority committed to me, I admit to the degree of Doctor of Letters, Honoris Causa, and many congratulations.
Most Honourable Chancellor, we are pleased to welcome to this congregation from the University of Sofia, Bulgaria, Alexander Shurbanov, internationally known and respected as a critic and translator of some of the classics of English literature. It is a pleasure to welcome such an enthusiastic Anglophile to England, particularly at a time when Bulgaria, like other Eastern European countries, is emerging from a long period of relative isolation to rejoin the common European family. It is also a particular pleasure to welcome him to Canterbury, since one of his earliest and most highly acclaimed verse translations was of Chaucer's The Canterbury Tales. This translation was first published in 1970. 20,000 copies were printed, and they all sold within a few days. Word had apparently gone round Sofia that some new saucy stories translated from the English had appeared. Some copies were returned to the shops when purchasers realized that the stories were, in fact, poetry. But full recognition of the quality of the verse came in due course, and later the book was much sought in the second-hand bookshops, fetching sums far in excess of its original selling price. A second edition of 50,000 copies appeared in 1980, and that too sold quickly. A third edition is now planned with some 25 original Bulgarian illustrations. Alexander Shurbanov has taught at the University of Sofia since 1971, around the time he was working for his doctorate on the poetry of John Donne. He was already almost as familiar with England as with her literature. He spent nearly a year at Sussex University in 1968, during which time he was busy translating some of the Canterbury Tales. He claims that while working on the translation, he came to think and feel like Chaucer and to perceive the world around him as Chaucer did. From 1970 to 1971, he was lecturer in Bulgarian language and literature at the University of London. He has, for most of his career, by example and teaching, encouraged in many of his compatriots an affection for and understanding of English culture. Through the active support he has given to the Anglo-Bulgarian undergraduate exchange scheme, he has made it possible for hundreds of students from the Department of English at Sofia University to come to Britain for periods of extended study and research. The University of Kent continues to be one of the beneficiaries of his dedication to the research side of this program and looks forward to developing student exchanges with the University of Sofia. Dr. Shurbanov is also president of the recently founded Bulgarian Society for British Studies. He has been a visiting lecturer at the University of California, the Universities of Leeds and Sheffield, and universities in Greece and India. In the midst of this extraordinarily busy life, he and his wife, Daniela, are able to retreat periodically to a small house some 80 miles from Sofia in the foothills of a mountain range. There, they cherish the fact that they are close to the site of a famous nationalist uprising when, to meet the sophisticated artillery of the occupying Turks, the Bulgarian resistance fashioned dangerous, short-lived cannon from hollowed cherry tree trunks. Alexander Shurbanov has written and published on most of the great 17th century English writers, but his major work is undoubtedly the verse translations. In addition to the Canterbury Tales, he has translated a number of Elizabethan and Jacobean plays. In 1981, he produced his monumental verse translation of Milton's Paradise Lost, a signally daunting task. Many English readers of Milton, including no doubt graduands in today's congregation, have formed the impression that this celebrated English epic is itself actually a stilted translation from a Latin original. Dr. Shurbanov is a gifted poet in his own right, and this enhances his sensitivity to the poetic voices of fellow practitioners. He is equally at home with Milton and more modern British writers. He has written introductions to Bulgarian editions of the work of W.H. Auden and H.G. Wells, has translated the poetry of Adrian Mitchell and Ted Hughes, and the Benjamin Bunny tales of Beatrix Potter. He has also recently completed a translation of the poems of Tagore. He is currently working on a critical study of Christopher Marlowe, the great Elizabethan dramatist who was born here in Canterbury. Yet another reason to feel that Dr. Shurbanov's presence here in Canterbury may constitute for him something of a significant literary pilgrimage. Most Honourable Chancellor, to you and to the whole University, I present Alexander Shurbanov to be admitted to the degree of Doctor of Letters, Honoris Causa.
By virtue of the authority committed to me, I admit you to the degree of Doctor of Letters, Honoris Causa. Many congratulations.
Most Honourable Chancellor, Pro-Chancellor, Vice-Chancellor, my lords, ladies and gentlemen, allow me, on behalf of Mrs. Valerie Elliott and myself, to express our gratitude for the great honour bestowed on us by the University of Kent. It is with the utmost humility that I come to speak to this honourable assembly in one of England's most sacred places. For as the father of modern poetry wrote in a play set in this very cathedral some 8 centuries back, wherever a saint has dwelt, wherever a martyr has given his blood for the blood of Christ, there is holy ground, and the sanctity shall not depart from it. Whether we are Christians or otherwise, it is an indisputable truth that the saint and the martyr has dwelt here, and his presence has turned this place into a shrine for all time. For when the barbaric violence of political tyranny was unleashed on him, he refused to bar the doors of this church and thus convert the sanctuary into a fortress. Against the massive brutality of barbarianism, he upheld the new invisible shield of civilization, frightfully brittle, yet amazingly sturdy and unshakable. This is the power that saints and martyrs have again and again taught us to recognize and respect as the only sign of the true dignity of man, as his only hope for the future. I believe that today we have finally become aware of their message. This is the time of the great unbarring of doors in Europe and the world. We, men and women of the 20th century, have all gone through bitter suffering, and there is an inevitable caution in the awakening of our mutual trust. But the process is briskly moving ahead. A formidable grey wall has collapsed in the very heart of this continent, and the two halves of the world, long divided by fanatic ideologies, political alliances, and nuclear warheads, are looking at each other with a sense of startled recognition. We all belong to the human race, and they're the tremendous challenges of the future that we must face together as humans. If we are to survive, the doors have to be unbarred. An unbarred door is indeed poor protection against the vicissitudes of chance, but behind a barred door, there is always the stench of prison. Universities all over the world have understandably been in the forefront of this new, exciting movement. The Erasmus program has already convinced thousands of young people in Western Europe that their entities larger than their own nations. Now its extension, Tempus, is stepping in to make the whole of academic Europe one single place again, at least in the minds of the young generation. But isn't it there that our actual future takes shape? Let us try and make this future a sanctuary of civilization where no more doors will have to be barred. My wish may sound utopian to the skeptically minded, but looking at you today, gathered in this magnificent temple of human faith, full of youthful hopes and aspirations on the threshold of life, I forget my doubts, and I believe with all my heart that such a feat is possible. It is up to you to accomplish it. For last year's words belong to last year's language, and next year's words await another voice.
Most Honourable Chancellor, to you and the whole University, I present these students in my faculty found worthy.
Most Honourable Chancellor, the printed programme for this ceremony contains the names of students in my faculty whose degrees have been authorised but who have requested that they should be conferred in absentia. This category also includes those students who had planned to attend this ceremony but who have since been prevented from doing so. I ask that these students be admitted to their degrees and that their degrees be conferred in absentia.
By virtue of the authority committed to me, I admit these students in absentia to their degrees. Mr. Vice-Chancellor, ladies and gentlemen, and most particularly those who are now graduates and no longer graduands. Like the graduands who are now graduates, I am about to leave my connection with the university as they are. And I thought it might be a good moment to take stock of university education and consider some elements of it which are to be found in the University of Kent. I say this because I strongly suspect that most of the graduates, having enjoyed Kent, I hope, benefited from Kent, will probably forget all about it until the day comes, and it comes all too quickly, when they will have to consider the education of their children. This is a very serious matter. I'm glad to say a matter which at least my last child took into his own hands. But he went to university, and I strongly recommend that you encourage your children to follow in your footsteps and go to universities. I think it is worth saying some things which have been said often before, and probably quite lately to you. And that is that a university is principally the place where civilization is preserved, extended, and taught. Civilization which has come down to us from Greece and Christianity, Western civilization which has now spread out through the world. Of course, universities do other things. They train you to be lawyers or engineers or scientists, but above all, they are the guardians of Western civilization. And at this university, when I first came, students were recommended by the deans not only for their intellectual fitness to be admitted to their degrees, but because they were considered of good character, in a fit of humility. The deans no longer recommend that. Perhaps they do not feel able to speak with authority on character. But I think it did emphasize that when you are admitted to a degree, it not only means that you have passed examinations, but you have gone through a course touching on all sorts of angles of civilization, and that the university has tried, may have failed, but has tried, not only to make you a good engineer or lawyer or whatever, but to make you a good human being, to make you a more rounded human being. That is what distinguishes universities from other institutions of education. Now, civilization and the rounding off of a human being are not only brought about by teaching, research, the pursuit of knowledge. If you go into one of the colleges of Kent, you will find a notice board strewn with innumerable notices of the most extraordinary and eccentric societies. Now, they are part of civilization. They are part of opening the mind, of questing into new fields. They are part of protest very often. They are part of civilization. And so I say, one of the reasons why you should send your children to do what you have done is to make them more complete persons. Now, as for the university itself, you could not, I think, have heard a better description of the place of the universities in the civilization of Europe than was given to you by your honorary graduate in his address. The importance of these great developments in Europe and the importance of the universities within them. Universities are no one's servant. They do not exist to serve the state, any state. They do not exist to serve industry. They do not exist to serve the professions or the churches. They are independent institutions who are dedicated to civilization, to the improvement of learning, of morals, of human character and human behavior. And in carrying that out, they must be the judges of how they can best do it. Now, another factor which I wish to touch on is that there could be other ways of teaching. I dare say that the law would get on quite well with teaching at the Inns of Court, the Army at Sandhurst, the Navy at Dartmouth, and so forth. And industry could be taught in technical colleges. And of course, this does happen, and it used to happen on a much wider scale. But I do believe that without universities, something absolutely essential to the civilized life of this country and Europe would disappear. And I note that the services, the professions, industry, they now prefer to take people who have graduated in the wider education of the university. So, treat your degrees with respect. Remember that you have been admitted into a society as well as being granted an opportunity to earn your living. And now I want to say a word or two about the University of Kent. Civilization, of course, is attached to no particular country or nation. The universities strive after an ideal which is as valid in Russia as it is in this country, or Germany, or anywhere else. It was the mistake of the Germans before the First War to assume that culture was a particularly German virtue and had certain German characteristics. They have abandoned that rightly, and now all the universities of Europe and the world pursue a civilization which is not national, I hope. But of course, it is a very many-colored thing. It is not a static thing. The development of human society and human beings is not a closed book. It continues from generation to generation, from place to place, from age to age. And each university is different. And I want to turn to this University of Canterbury, which after 25 years of successful life has established itself as a true university developed to the pursuit of civilization and civilized values. Now, what are its particular characteristics? It has a college system. I think that's a good thing. I think it gives it an intimacy which some universities do not have. I think it is a happy place as far as I can judge. I have been associated off and on in an amateur and incompetent way with 6 or 7 universities. And I would place Kent high for happiness. And I think happiness is very important. The 2 or 3 years you spend at a university are not only training or preparation, they are 2 or 3 very important years in your life. And they should be happy. And I think at Kent they are. Now, I hope it is exciting. This, I think, today is much more difficult than it was. That a word has been debased. But a university ought to be an exciting place, an eccentric place, in which you rub up against all sorts of things you haven't met before, and people who appear very odd, and all the different opportunities which a university should give you. And I wonder if we have quite enough of that. When I was a boy at St. Andrews, the 3 most eminent professors who were of national and indeed international repute would not, I think, have held a job in a university today. They would have been, put it bluntly, removed. One was too deaf, one was too old, and one was too drunk. And the one who was too drunk probably had the most effect of any of them. And I wonder whether it is a good thing that we now weed out the undesirables from universities, because do we know who are undesirable in university? And I wonder what would have happened. We now, I understand, have a sort of academic audit. I just wonder what would have happened if the academic auditors had turned up at the St. Andrews of my youth. They would have got pretty short shrift from Professor Lindsay, the greatest authority on Latin, certainly in the Western world. Can you imagine him submitting to being audited? His nephew was the master of Balliol, and when he got tired of the master of Balliol's company, he was determined to go away and play. And that's exactly what he would have told the auditors. So, for goodness sake, let us keep a degree of eccentricity in universities, and perhaps we do. Now, secondly, with all, as I say, the common features of civilization, every part of Britain, every institution of Britain, every single person is different, and we must preserve that. We must preserve the Kentishness of the University of Kent. It starts with the enormous advantage of being in Canterbury, most ancient, I suppose, centre of learning in Britain, older than Oxford or Cambridge, and the seat of its church. Look at this magnificent building which you have. What other university can rival you, except possibly York, and it's an inferior institution, I understand. Now, there are other universities, and there is a university at Suffolk or Sussex, or both possibly. There is one as far north as Aberdeen. There's Oxford, which I graced with my presence. There's Yale. But there is the University of Kent, and that is where we are today. And it is of that institution that you are graduates. Never forget that. You are BAs of the community of Kent. I am told that Mr. Harold Wilson, rather out of fashion just now, but he was Prime Minister of this country, thought getting his degree was so important. It was the most important thing that happened to him until he married his wife Mary. And he was married in the very clothes in which he received his degree. Well, I don't ask you all to do that, but I do say that it is a respect due. There is a respect due to learning, to degrees, and to teachers. I have totally failed to get people in the university to employ the proper form of address in academic circles, which is to address the senior staff as doctors, as learned doctors. They may not be learned doctors, but they're entitled to the title, just as members of Parliament who have been in the regular army are entitled to be called gallant, though they may have run away as fast as their heels can carry them. The only person I've converted to this point of view, and it's worth the conversion, I think, is Lord Scarman. But I toil on. But respect learning, respect the university, and do not be drawn aside by stories that they must conform to the state or industry or a church or anything else. Now, also, I think a little nationalism is no bad thing. I have been converted to a degree myself, not entirely. Scotland must always win at rugby football. I do not mind how many Kentish men or men of Kent are in the English 15. It will, I trust, be beaten, and beaten by the largest margin possible. No compromise on that. But on minor matters like cricket, I'm prepared to see Kent win the county championship if it still exists year after year. And long may the Treasurer be there to cheer them on. If the Vice-Chancellor takes to yacht racing, I understand he is a crypto addict to boats, I hope he wins every race, not just a race here and there, but every race. I hope the University of Kent win all honours, not just some. And I hope that you, when you go down from this university, may forget for a time all about it, but in the course of time, will find that you are proud of being a BA, and above all, of being a BA of the University of Kent. I declare this congregation closed.